There's a pattern in financial history that has destroyed the savings of millions in the last 15 years. And right now, in 2225, the legal framework is in place for it to happen in the United States. In 2013, Cyprus woke up one morning to find their banks closed. When they reopened, 47% of deposits over €100,000 were simply gone, seized, not stolen. Legally confiscated by the government to save failing banks. In 2015, Greece imposed capital controls. Citizens could withdraw 60 per day from their own accounts. That was it. Your money was trapped. You couldn't access it, you couldn't transfer it, you couldn't leave the country with it for months. And in 2019, Lebanon's banks froze all accounts. People who had millions in savings couldn't withdraw more than $200 per week. That restriction is still in place today. 6 years later, their money is gone. Trapped in a failed system 3 times, 3 developed nations. 3 moments when governments legally took depositors' money. Not through taxation, not through inflation, directly from bank accounts. And here's what should terrify you. The legal mechanism to do this in the United States already exists. It was created in 2010 under Dodd-Frank. It's called bail-in authority. And when the next banking crisis hits, and it's coming, your deposits are the first line of defense. Not government money, not Federal Reserve loans, your money. This is the story of how modern governments seize bank deposits, why the law allows it, and why your savings are not as safe as you think. Before we go through the pattern, you need to understand what a bail-in actually is and why it's different from everything that came before. In 2008, when banks failed, governments bailed them out. Taxpayer money, printed money, emergency loans, the bank's losses were transferred to the public and people were furious. Too big to fail became too big to save. The political backlash was enormous, so in 2010, governments in the US and Europe passed new laws. The official reason was to prevent future bailouts. Banks should fail if they make bad bets. No more taxpayer rescues. Sounds good, right? But here's the catch. When a bank fails, someone has to take the losses. The shareholders lose first, obviously, then the bondholders. But if that's not enough, if the losses are bigger than the equity and bonds combined, who's next? Depositors. The people who thought their money was safe in the bank. This is a bail-in. Instead of the government bailing out the bank with taxpayer money, the bank bails itself in by taking depositors' money. Your savings become the bank's capital overnight without warning, without your consent. It's legal, it's in the law, and it's already happened 3 times. Let's start with the first time the world saw this in action. Cyprus, March 2013. This is the blueprint. Cyprus is a small island nation in the Mediterranean, about 1.2 million people. It's part of the European Union and uses the euro. And in the 2000s, Cyprus became a banking center. Russian oligarchs, European businesses, wealthy individuals, they all parked money in Cypriot banks. Why? Low taxes, banking secrecy, access to the eurozone. By 2012, the banking sector in Cyprus held assets equal to 800% of the country's GDP, 8 times. The 2 largest banks, Bank of Cyprus and Lay Bank, had become too big, way too big. And they'd made bad investments. They bought Greek government bonds, lots of them. Greek bonds paid high interest rates, 10-12%. So, Cypriot banks loaded up. But when Greece had its debt crisis in 2010-2012, those bonds collapsed. Greece restructured its debt. Bondholders took 50 to 70% losses, and create banks holding billions in Greek bonds were suddenly insolvent. They'd lost more than their capital. They were bankrupt, but they stayed open because everyone pretended the losses weren't real. Mark-to-market, not if it means admitting failure. Then in early 2013, the pretending ended. The banks needed a bailout, $10 billion to recapitalize. But Cyprus's entire GDP was only $18 billion. The government couldn't afford it, so Cyprus went to the European Union and IMF for help. And the EU said, yes, we'll provide funds, but on one condition, you have to bail in the depositors. March 16, 2013, banks in Cyprus closed. It was a Saturday, no warning. Depositors woke up to find ATMs shut down, bank branches locked, and an announcement from the government, a tax they called it, a one-time stability levy on all bank deposits. The banks reopened on March 28, almost 2 weeks later. But with capital controls, you couldn't transfer money out of Cyprus. Let's jump forward 2 years. Greece, summer 2015. By 2015, Greece was deep in its debt crisis. 5 years of austerity, GDP down 25%, unemployment at 25%. And they still couldn't pay their debts. In June 2015, negotiations with the EU and IMF broke down. Greece was about to default, and Greeks knew what was coming. They'd seen Cyprus. If Greece defaulted, the banks would collapse. And if the banks collapsed, deposits would be seized. So Greeks started pulling money out. In 1 week, June 152, $8 billion left Greek banks. Bank runs started. The banks were bleeding cash. And if it continued, they'd run out. On June 28, 2015, the Greek Prime Minister went on television, announced a referendum on the bailout deal, and announced that banks would close the next day. For 1 week, he said the banks closed June 29th. They didn't fully reopen for 3 weeks, and when they did, capital controls were in place. The restrictions were severe. Greeks could withdraw $60 per day from ATMs. That's it. $60, about $65 at the time. If you needed to buy groceries, pay rent, buy medicine, you had $60 per day. Pensioners who didn't have ATM cards could withdraw $120 per week once a week from a branch. Imagine being 75 years old, waiting in line for hours in the summer heat to get $120 to live on for a week. That was reality. Wire transfers abroad were forbidden. You couldn't pay international suppliers. Businesses couldn't import goods. You couldn't send money to family living overseas. The economy was cash only, and there wasn't enough cash. Greece didn't do a bail-in like Cyprus. They didn't seize a percentage of deposits, but they did something arguably worse. They trapped the money, made it unusable. If you can't access your savings, if you can't use more than $60 per day, do you really have that money? In practical terms, it's been confiscated. You can see the number in your account, but you can't use it. It's trapped. The capital controls lasted officially until 2019, 4 years. And even when they were lifted, Greeks had learned the lesson. Don't trust the banks. Don't keep your money in Greek banks. Today, Greeks keep cash at home under mattresses, in safes, or they move it abroad if they can. Bank deposits in Greece are still below 2009 levels 16 years later because once trust breaks, it never fully recovers. The lesson of Greece, even without a bail-in, governments can trap your money with capital controls, make it inaccessible, make it worthless in practice, and the restrictions can last for years. But Cyprus was small, Greece was struggling. Maybe this only happens to weak countries in crisis. Lebanon proved it can happen to middle-income nations with established banking systems too. Now, let's look at Lebanon. Starting in 2019, this one is still ongoing, and it might be the worst of all. Lebanon was called the Switzerland of the Middle East for decades. Beirut was a financial center. Lebanese banks were considered solid. The Lebanese pound had been pegged to the US dollar at $1,500 to $1 since 1997, stable for over 20 years. And Lebanon's banking sector was huge. Bank assets were 400% of GDP by 2019. But beneath the surface, it was all a Ponzi scheme. The Lebanese government was running massive deficits, 10-15% of GDP annually. They borrowed constantly. Lebanese banks bought the government bonds, paying 8 to 12% interest. Where did banks get the money to buy government bonds? From depositors. Lebanese and foreigners deposited dollars into Lebanese banks because the interest rates were high. And banks used those dollars to buy government bonds. It worked as long as new deposits kept coming in. But it was a Ponzi scheme, using new deposits to pay interest on old deposits and fund the government. In 2019, it started to break. The government couldn't borrow anymore. International lenders stopped lending, foreign currency reserves started dropping, and depositors got nervous. October 2019, protests erupted. The government announced new taxes. People took to the streets. And quietly, bank runs started, people trying to withdraw dollars. But banks didn't have enough dollars because they lent them to the government and the government had spent them. November 2019, banks started limiting withdrawals. Informally at first, then officially, you could withdraw $1,000 per week, then $200 per week, then $100 per week. By early 2020, many banks allowed only $50 and $100 per week in cash withdrawals. But here's the cruel part. Your account statement still showed your full balance, and the restrictions are still in place today in 2025, 6 years later. Banks never gave the money back. The government defaulted on its debt in 2020. The currency is worthless and depositors are stuck. Some have filed lawsuits. Some have stormed banks with weapons trying to take their own money by force. There have been hostage situations. People so desperate they take bank employees hostage, demanding their own savings. In 2022, a man held up a bank with a gun to withdraw $5,000 of his own money to pay for his father's medical treatment. He became a folk hero because everyone in Lebanon is in the same situation. The lesson of Lebanon: modern banking runs on confidence. When confidence breaks, banks can simply refuse to give you your money indefinitely. The government won't help. The courts can't help because the money's gone. The bank doesn't have it. It's been lent to an insolvent government or lost in bad investments, and you're just a creditor to a failed institution. 3 countries, 3 different mechanisms, but the same result. Depositors lost access to their money. Cyprus, direct bail-in, 47% seized and converted to worthless shares. Greece, capital controls, money trapped, only $60 per day accessible. Lebanon, informal freeze, money visible in account but impossible to withdraw. In all 3 cases, people who thought their money was safe in the bank were wrong, and in all 3 cases, it was legal, or at least no one was prosecuted. Let's break down the pattern because it's identical every time, and the United States is showing every warning sign. Stage 1, banking sector becomes too large. Cyprus, 800% of GDP. Greece, 300% of GDP. Lebanon, 400% of GDP. When the banking sector is multiple times the size of the economy, the government cannot bail it out if it fails. It's mathematically impossible, and in the USA, the 6 largest banks have combined assets of over $12 trillion. That's 43% of US GDP held by just 6 institutions. If they fail simultaneously, there's no bailout big enough. Stage 2, banks make risky bets. Cyprus bought Greek government bonds that collapsed. Greece lent to an insolvent government. Lebanon ran a Ponzi scheme with government bonds. Banks take risks because in good times they make huge profits, and in bad times they expect bailouts, moral hazard. In the USA, banks are sitting on $500 billion in unrealized losses on bond portfolios. Commercial real estate is collapsing. Silicon Valley Bank, Signature, and First Republic already failed in 2023. Those were warning shots. Stage 3, crisis trigger exposes the risks. Cyprus, Greek debt restructuring. Greece, debt default. Lebanon, government ran out of foreign currency. Something happens that reveals the bank's losses are real and can't be hidden anymore. In the USA, the trigger could be a recession, a commercial real estate crash, rising interest rates making bond losses impossible to hide, a geopolitical crisis causing a dollar flight. The specific trigger doesn't matter. The vulnerabilities are already there. Stage 4, bank runs begin. Once people see the risk, they try to get their money out, and that's rational. In a fractional reserve system, banks only keep about 10% of deposits as reserves. The rest is lent out, so if everyone tries to withdraw at once, the bank fails. In all 3 examples, bank runs started or were about to start when governments acted. In the USA, we saw many runs in 2023. Silicon Valley Bank experienced $42 billion in withdrawals in one day before regulators shut it down. The infrastructure for digital bank runs, where you can move money with a phone app, makes modern runs faster and more deadly than ever. Stage 5, government intervention. The government steps in to prevent total collapse, but the intervention comes with a cost, and that cost is paid by depositors. Cyprus bail-in seized deposits, Greece capital controls, trapped money, Lebanon informal freeze, indefinite restrictions. In the USA, what will it be? The law already allows bail-ins. Dodd-Frank Section 206 gives the FDIC authority to resolve failing banks by converting deposits to equity. Your cash becomes stuck in a failing bank. The law is on the books. It just hasn't been used yet. Stage 6, years of economic pain. Even after the immediate crisis, the damage lasts. Cyprus took years to recover. Greece is still dealing with the aftermath. Lebanon is in a humanitarian crisis, because once people lose their savings, once trust in banks is destroyed, it doesn't come back. People hoard cash. Businesses can't get credit. Investment stops. The economy stagnates. That's the pattern. 6 stages. And the United States has completed stages 1 through 4. We're in stage 5. The next banking crisis is forming right now. Let's look at the specific vulnerabilities. First, unrealized losses at regional banks. When the Federal Reserve raised interest rates from near 0 to 5% in 2022-2023, bond prices collapsed. Banks hold trillions in bonds, and those bonds are now worth far less than what the banks paid for them. Under accounting rules, banks don't have to recognize those losses as long as they hold the bonds to maturity. But if depositors withdraw money, banks have to sell bonds to get cash. And when they sell, they realize the losses, and losses reduce capital. Reduce it enough, and the bank is insolvent. Silicon Valley Bank failed this way. They had $16 billion in unrealized losses. When depositors withdrew, they had to sell bonds, realize the losses, and boom, bankrupt. There are dozens of regional banks in the same situation. Second, commercial real estate. Office buildings are worth 40–50% less than they were in 2019 because of remote work, but banks lend against 2019 valuations. There are $3 trillion in commercial real estate loans held by U.S. banks. When those properties are refinanced or sold at current values, banks take losses. New York Community Bank nearly failed in early 2024 because of commercial real estate exposure. They're not alone. Third, FDIC insurance is a fiction. The FDIC has about $125 billion in its insurance fund. Total insured deposits in the U.S. are about $10 trillion. That's 1.25% coverage. If 2% of banks fail, the fund is wiped out, and there are over $18 trillion in total deposits. Most of that is uninsured if you have more than $250,000 in one bank. Anything over that limit is not covered. And even for amounts under $250,000, if enough banks fail simultaneously, the FDIC doesn't have the money. They'd have to borrow from the Treasury or the Fed, which means printing money, which means inflation. Either you lose your deposits directly, or you lose them through inflation. Pick your poison. Fourth, digital bank runs are unstoppable. In the old days, a bank run took time. You had to physically go to the bank, stand in line. There was friction. Today you can withdraw $50,000 with a phone app in 30 seconds, transfer it to another bank, or buy Bitcoin. Silicon Valley Bank saw $42 billion withdrawn in one day. That's 25% of their deposits, gone in 24 hours. No bank can survive that. And once one bank fails, panic spreads instantly via social media. Everyone tries to withdraw from similar banks at the same time. It's game over. Fifth, the bail-in law exists. Dodd-Frank is clear. In a systemic crisis, the FDIC can resolve failing banks through bail-ins. So, what happens next? Let's imagine the scenario. It's late 2025 or 2026. A recession hits, unemployment rises, corporate defaults start. Commercial real estate loans start failing. A major regional bank announces massive losses. Depositors panic. They start withdrawing. The bank fails. FDIC takes it over, but the FDIC can't cover all the deposits. Other banks with similar exposures see runs. 3 more banks fail in 1 week. The FDIC fund is nearly depleted. The stock market crashes 20%. Credit markets freeze. The president declares a financial emergency. Over the weekend, capital controls are announced. Withdrawal limits $300 per day from ATMs, transfer limits. You can't move more than $10,000 without approval. Wire transfers abroad are suspended, and the FDI announces that deposits at failed banks over $250,000 will be converted to equity. Bail-in, you had $500,000 in the bank, $250,000 is insured. The other $250,000 becomes shares in a bank that's worth maybe 20 cents on the dollar. 3 times, 3 countries, 3 moments when depositors learn that their money in the bank isn't actually their money. It's an unsecured loan to the bank. And in a crisis, that loan can be converted to equity or frozen indefinitely. Cyprus taught us bail-ins are legal. Greece taught us capital controls can last for years. Lebanon taught us banks can simply refuse to give you your money and there's nothing you can do. And the United States has the legal framework for both bail-ins and capital controls already in place. The vulnerabilities are extreme. The warnings are everywhere, and the pattern says it's coming. Maybe you have 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 2. But the math says it's inevitable, so what do you do? First, understand that bank deposits are not savings. They're loans to the bank, unsecured loans. If the bank fails, you're a creditor, not a depositor. And creditors take losses. Second, don't keep all your money in one bank. Don't keep more than $250,000 in any one institution. Spread it around. Reduce single points of failure. Third, keep some cash outside the banking system, physical cash. If there are capital controls or bail-ins, cash in hand is the only money you'll have access to. Fourth, consider hard assets, real estate, gold, things that exist outside the banking system and can't be frozen or bailed in. Fifth, have a plan. Know what you'll do if capitals are announced, where you'll move money, what you'll buy. Because once it starts, you won't have time to figure it out. And sixth, understand that the government will not protect you. They'll protect the system, they'll protect the banks, and if that means taking your money, they will. Cyprus, Greece, and Lebanon proved it. The law in the USA allows it, and when the crisis comes, it will happen. 3 times in 12 years, governments legally took depositors' money. Each time, people thought they were safe. Each time, they thought it couldn't happen to them. Each time, they were wrong. The pattern is clear. The law is in place. The vulnerabilities are extreme, and history has shown us exactly what happens next. The only question is whether you'll see it coming before your money is trapped. If this opened your eyes to what's actually coming, subscribe. Because when the next banking crisis hits, when your money is frozen or bailed in, you'll want to understand what happened and why. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the past, and I'll show you where to.